At almost 50 meters below the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, in a steel tube no wider than a city bus, more than 70 Soviet sailors were slowly being cooked alive. The air inside the submarine was thick, wet, and barely breathable. Sweat dripped from the ceiling. Men had stopped talking. Some had already collapsed to the floor, dizzy from heat and lack of oxygen. And in the control room, 3 Soviet officers were arguing in voices that shook not just with anger, but with fear. They had been submerged for days. Their batteries were nearly dead. Their radio was silent. No messages from Moscow. No confirmation that the Soviet Union still existed. And above them, American warships were circling, dropping explosive charges into the water, not to destroy the submarine, but to force it to surface. To the exhausted men inside, it felt like an attack. One of the officers turned and said the words that would have ended the world. "Prepare the nuclear torpedo." It was October 27th, 1962, the most dangerous day of the Cuban Missile Crisis. On the surface of the planet, President John F. Kennedy and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev were exchanging messages, desperately trying to prevent war. But deep below the ocean, none of that mattered. The men in this submarine had no idea diplomacy was happening. All they knew was that they were being hunted. The Soviet submarine B-59 was not just any submarine. It carried a nuclear torpedo, a weapon so powerful it could instantly destroy an entire American fleet. The crew had been sent into the Atlantic to patrol near Cuba, but once the crisis began, American ships had started tracking them. For days, the B-59 had been forced to stay underwater, running out of air, electricity, and hope. In Soviet military doctrine, if a submarine was attacked and lost contact with Moscow, it was allowed to assume the war had already begun and respond. Inside the submarine, the nuclear torpedo sat in its tube, silent and ready. It was not like the bombs dropped in World War II. This weapon was many times stronger. If launched, it would explode underwater, sending a massive nuclear shockwave into the sea, obliterating every ship in range. The U.S. Navy would have interpreted it as a deliberate nuclear attack. Within hours, missiles would be flying toward Soviet cities. 3 officers were required to authorize its launch. The captain, Valentin Savitsky, was convinced they were under attack. He believed American depth charges were the first shots of World War III. The political officer agreed with him. The crew was panicking. Men were fainting. The temperature kept rising. Everything inside the submarine felt like the final moments of a dying world. 2 keys were ready. One more approval was needed. And if your heart just tightened hearing that, hit like. Because what happened next decided whether you are alive today. The 3rd officer was a man named Vasili Arkhipov. Unlike the others, Arkhipov was not panicking. He was exhausted. He was suffocating. But he was thinking. He knew that American depth charges were small. They were not designed to destroy submarines. They were signals, warnings meant to force them to surface, not to kill them. And more importantly, Arkhipov knew something the others did not. If nuclear war had already started, Moscow would not be silent. The radios would be screaming. He stood between 2 men who were ready to end civilization, and he said no. Savitsky shouted at him. The political officer demanded he follow protocol, but Arkhipov refused to give his approval. Soviet law required all 3 officers to agree. Without him, the launch was impossible. Minutes passed. The submarine continued to shake as explosions echoed outside. The crew waited. The torpedo stayed in its tube. Eventually, the B-59 surfaced, and the world did not end. Above the ocean, American sailors had no idea what had just happened beneath them. Kennedy and Khrushchev would later be praised for preventing nuclear war. But the truth was darker and more terrifying. Humanity survived not because of leaders, but because one tired, sweating Soviet officer chose to disobey an order. For decades, no one knew his name. The Soviet Union never told the story. Arkhipov never became famous. But without him, cities across Europe and North America would have vanished in nuclear fire. This was the real face of the Cold War. Not speeches, not flags, but men trapped in impossible situations, holding the fate of the world in their hands. The Soviet Union liked to present itself as strong, disciplined, and in control. But moments like this revealed the truth. Their system was fragile. Their technology was outdated. Their chain of command was dangerous. Just like on the night Apollo 11 reached the moon, the Soviet Empire was already cracking. And this was only one of many moments the world never saw.